Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings, but I'ma be alright. Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the New Jersey Psychological Association's Powerless Spoken Word podcast series. I'm Dr. Lee, and this is the best place where you can find information about psychology and the psychologists in New Jersey. So our podcasts are created to be a resource for everyone who lives, works, and plays in New Jersey. And today, we're joined by two guests who are going to help us think about a topic that we, as particularly as us mid to late mid folks, are kind of adjusting to, sort of digital presence. So the topic is how to create and maintain a digital presence for successful telepsychology and assessment work. So I'm joined by two guests. Our first is Jared Hammond, and he is the New Jersey Psychological Association graduate students chair elect. He just completed his third year of doctoral training at King University's combined school and clinical psychology program. Previously, he spent a year working in the Livingston Public School District as a school psychologist. Jared's most recent clinical practicum was at Kessler's Institute for Rehabilitation, where he where he worked for a year on the acute brain injury unit doing neuropsychological assessment and therapy with a wide array of patients, including stroke, dementia, and COVID-19, which is interesting. He is also a senior psychometrician at Head to Head Consultants in Gladstone, New Jersey, doing neuropsychological assessment with children and adults. Jared's education includes a background in computer science. He's certified in heart rate variability and biofeedback techniques, as well as Reiki and multiple yoga orientation. Jared is an active member of many organizations, including the NJPA, and you had so many alphabets here, I couldn't even name them all, but a bunch. In his spare time, he likes to paint and do archery. And I love this part about you. He also coaches a local high school fencing team. This season, Jared coached his team to his third consecutive state championship and was voted New Jersey Coach of the Year. Congratulations on that. That's really good. My son fenced, so that was really nice to see. In Tangier, so I'm hoping you're back. I see you're still muted, and I don't see an image of you. So I'm hoping you're still around while we're trying to figure this out. He's a recent graduate of Rutgers University Camden with a degree in psychology. He's a member of the Tau Kappa Epsilon fraternity and has major ambitions of taking on and integrating the broadcasting and psychology world. And this is actually the reason we're doing this topic.
I think, like as they say in medicine, Dr. Lee, this is, as they say, a teachable moment, a perfect
Yes.
explanation of the importance of technology.
Yes. So, Jared, let's start with you. Talk a little bit about what does it mean to have a digital presence?
I think the best way to describe that, Dr. Lee, is recognizing that with the internet and with social networking, that we now have the opportunity to connect with each other, but also that even when we're not actively trying to connect, that still exists in the digital world. So how can we get use of this technology and integrate it into our psychological work so that it continues to work for us when we're not actively working?
Okay. I mean, that's a really good point. And I know we're talking about that more and more, particularly on how can clients access us. And I think we're moved, like with my generation, it was the business card. And now everybody is looking at sort of their website and digital presence as the new video, business card. So can you talk a little bit about then what makes having and maintaining and even creating for some people a digital presence, important right now?
I think it's important, Dr. Lee, because most people don't realize that they already have a digital presence, whether they want it or not.
Mhm.
I always recommend to my clients that they go onto Google or Bing or Yahoo and do a search of themselves and see what comes up.
Mhm.
Because that's how our clients might react to us initially. They may get a referral for a psychologist and just may put your name right into Google. So it's important to see that the Dr. Daniel Lee comes up and not the professional bodybuilder comes up.
And I think that's a good point, because I think what we're used to, I think, particularly, I think maybe my generations and some other generations, where I think we take for granted that people research us now. Like they will do some web and internet search, like they will just drop in a name and see what comes up. So I have one colleague, he said he doesn't even use business cards. He tells people, here's the search, here, throw this search in and you'll find my contact information. So, and I thought that was interesting in terms of, sort of some of the points that people are saying now about how easy and accessible who we are is. So that's interesting, and makes it even more important. So welcome back, Tangier Moore. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. having some trouble there, but we're all good to go now.
All right. Well, we were saying like this is that teachable moment about technology. so we can tell everybody it happens, and you just got to kind of figure it out until it gets right. So we're on a segment right now. Well, I want to talk a little bit about digital presence and branding. And I think, Jared, you sort of mentioned this a little earlier, that what these psychologists need to be aware of in terms of those issues.
Right, absolutely. First and foremost, I always put this out there that every psychologist has their own ethical responsibility to understand how a digital space is going to impact the work that they do. For example, there are a lot of great articles out there that I can share with both of you regarding the importance of having private accounts. For example, if you had a business social media account, then technically anyone who followed you from your business would be outed as a client, and that's a HIPAA violation. So there has to be not only those practices, but also informed consent practices. So certainly there are a lot of additional things that go into this, but certainly I think at least in my judgment at this time, for me, I feel that the benefits outweigh the risks at this time.
Okay. And you also mentioned some points like creating, expanding, and maintaining your brand. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So when it comes to creating, I think it's important to really understand, what do you want your space to be? For example, at the Private Practice Head-to-Head Consultants, one of our tools that we use is a very comprehensive website that is very interactive. So we get a lot of our referrals just through the website. People coming in saying that I'm having difficulty adjusting with COVID-19, or my wedding was canceled, or I'm having difficulty learning through Zoom. Just having that website there is basically a digital business card in and of itself. So I think that's an important aspect. Another one is maintaining and really just going through. And once you've set up all of these different branding platforms, whether that be a website or Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, G Suite Business, once you decide which brands are right for you, then just maintaining those posts, whether it be daily affirmations or general practice ideas, mindfulness, coping strategies, free resources. You have to do something to continue to push that brand out so that people know that you're a source of information and for tools. And then, of course, is just general compliance and trying to update that. How do we make it better? There are a lot of people out there who are coming up with great ideas, and thank goodness they're sharing it freely. And I think that's the thing, as in this practice of psychology, everything we're doing is to help others.
Okay. And I know, and that kind of gets onto the point you sort of mentioned, I think, as we were talking about creating this podcast around application. And I was thinking about that from the perspective how our, the NJPA's government affairs agent mentioned that, given sort of what's happening with mental health issues and COVID-19, that the public is going to be looking to hear from psychologists more. So, and I'm wondering, how should psychologists be thinking about themselves as a resource, maybe even from a digital perspective, or using digital platforms to be a resource?
That's a great question, Dr. Lee. And most people, especially, are taken aback right now about teleassessments, saying that it's all new and things are not normed in that regard. However, INS, the International Neuropsychological Society, has research published as early as 2014. So I think the information exists. We just need to go out and get it. And that really comes back to the application standpoint. People are going to be looking to us. I just got off a call this morning where first responders were talking about they've seen more deaths in the past few weeks than they've ever seen in their career. So how do we help those people? It behooves us as psychologists to really understand the data, the literature that's out there, and recognize that technology, at least for the foreseeable future, is perhaps the most important medium for helping others at this time.
That's a good point. Now, I want to get Tangier involved in this conversation and also integrate Jared, but talking about managing your digital presence. So a lot of people right now are really dealing with the newness of sort of telehealth and teletherapy. Even with some of the ideas of teleassessment, and there are some online models like Pearson has, a lot of them are coming up with more, but I know Pearson has some of their sort of major tests where you can do virtually and things like that. And I know people are thinking about whether, I know at one of my sites, are we going to do a hybrid model where we're going to integrate sort of some virtual versus some in-person work as we transition back to this new normal. But I know a lot of people are struggling with the idea that this is becoming the normal, like virtual sort of connections and engagement are like here, and they're not going anywhere. I don't think this is one of those moments that I think now that we've crossed this threshold, I don't think we're going back. So I think it will always be around. So I wanted to touch base with Tangier and think about, just what are some strategies that can help people sort of engage clients using virtual platforms?
I got you. So what I think about some strategies that help in engaging people with virtual platforms is that in reading, about digital presence and all that, one of the things that really stood out to me the most was becoming your best you. And I felt like in saying that, I feel like that applies to basically any situation that you have in life, whether you're going to a job interview, you're doing like a teleassessment for psychology, or you're meeting with clients, because of the fact that when you show up and you feel good and you look good, that is always something that I feel like it just helps make you feel more comfortable in what you're doing. So I feel like, showing up, becoming your best you, maintaining what you're doing and your platform is really something that's very essential to the success of yourself.
And I'm wondering, because I've been hearing people talk more and more about virtual fatigue, like Zoom fatigue and things like that. So I'm wondering too, how, and because it's a new platform, we take for granted the idea of being in person and all the nonverbals that we can pick up on. And virtually, you may not be seeing everything that a person is doing. So how can you what tips or strategies can we think about in terms of sort of sustaining yourself, particularly if you're having like a regular sort of clinical day where you might have 5 or 6 people that you might be looking at in terms of a camera? And also, how can you help structure the interaction with clients? So Jared, let me go to you with that first.
I think that's a great point, Dr. Lee. One of the things that certainly I have done is that I have a blue light film over my laptop screen and all my screens. You can purchase these for 3 in a pack for about $10. And not only are they really helpful for privacy purposes, but they will help filter out some of the light that could strain eyes. So I have that on my laptop, my cell phone, and all of my devices. So if you wear prescription glasses, you can actually get special blue light lenses that will filter out the light for you. So I've recommended that to a lot of my colleagues, and they've reported that it's helped tremendously.
Okay. Tangier, any other thoughts you may want to add?
Gotcha. So one thing I typically do before, I start any day is I typically plan the day ahead in advance. So
Mhm.
typically if you're meeting with clients on, a regular basis, usually, you'll just kind of time it and plan it accordingly. So, you'll schedule yourself for breaks in between time for about a good 10 to 15 minutes. And
Mhm.
overall, just making sure you're good and rejuvenated so that you can move on to your next focus point.
Like that. I like that.
That's a great point, Tangier, because right now in this digital space, there's so much that can be unscheduled. And it's just as important not only to schedule the meetings, but our break times. And a
Mhm.
lot of mindfulness work is about scheduling your exercise as if it were just any other meeting. You can't reschedule that meeting. You can't cancel that meeting. That is a meeting in the calendar. So scheduling breaks, I think, is a great idea.
I like that point too. And some things, I was on a webinar at one point and listening to some strategies, and it talked about really making sure that you structure the conversations a little bit more so that you're not as tangential. Lighting, they say that's a big issue. Background, so you're not distracting, and even being conscious of the personal information that you're going to show. And then I think with some clients, being conscious of the personal information you may see. So I think a lot of people are getting prepared in terms of understanding their clients differently because now you can see the home that they may be talking about or the dog they might be saying something about. It's like so that everybody's like kind of learning like, oh, look, it's more dynamic than what it was where I think we've had this idea in psychology that like we're blank slates, but now people are seeing into our spaces. So particularly if we're not in our offices anymore. So thinking about those sort of things. So and I want to talk a little bit about since you did a really good job with strategies about some of the pitfalls that may come from digital engagement and maintain the presence. So I'm curious about like what are some things that may detract from someone's digital experience online, particularly as we're thinking about teletherapy or teleassessment. And Jared, I'll start with you and then go to Tangier.
I don't think we can overlook how privilege impacts the use of teleassessment at this time. I have a lot of clients who are struggling right now, and even basic things like Wi-Fi is hard to access, or technology being unreliable because the technology they were provided as part of whether it's their school or their work is older technology. So I think that we take for granted how easy it can be to get on a good Wi-Fi connection or get access to reliable technology. I think for a lot of people, that is not the case. And that's an important thing that we need to be aware of when planning.
That's huge. That is a point. And I know we've been advocating for like audio only sessions for at least therapy for some folks because, like you say, access to care is an issue, and not everybody has a smartphone. So that's another issue. Or we're noticing with some folks, they don't have like the ability to sort of engage in the technology. So it just becomes more cumbersome for them. So
And
Tangier,
also, I'm sorry, Dr. Lee. I just
no,
want
go ahead,
to one other thing in there is, and this is an important ethical concern, is how do we as people in psychology do risk assessment through a digital platform? I know
Yeah.
that we at Kessler and also at Head to Head Consultants, we have plans in place for risk assessment and what to do in those situations. But I think that it's a very different thing that not everyone would think of. That if someone divulges something very sensitive, how do we manage risk when you're not in the room with that person?
And I know with some informed consents, since we're talking about this for a minute, and I know even with some of our regs, you want to identify where the person is one consideration. You want to identify a contact person. So like on our informed consent, we identify sort of an emergency contact. So if we lose contact with that person, we have someone that we could follow up with to check in on that person. And we want to identify the closest mental health crisis resource. So we can help guide, maybe it might be that client and or their contact. So those are good points. And I think these are things that we have to start considering because we don't know where people are. So, and we're hoping people are honest, and I think it's going to be more and more important to include other people into your client's care and being explicit about that as we move forward. So I agree with you. So Tangier, what are some other pitfalls that you see in terms of digital engagement?
Well, in terms of pitfalls, as for what I see in digital engagement, I think similar to what Jared said, just really maintaining like things like having good Wi-Fi and good practices and all that, and also as far as not oversharing your personal space. So typically, practice when you get in front of the camera what you're going to say and how you want to say it. Always make sure you maintain a professional attire. And
Mm-hmm.
also in terms of like your background, always have like a nice neutral background where you're not really showing too much, where you're really just the main focus. Because when you have
Mm-hmm.
things like going on in the background, it takes away from what you're talking about, and also as a distraction. So I feel like overall, just having a nice neutral background, a nice personal and professional attire will really set you far in digital presence.
I know. And I think that is huge. I think where we have to start thinking about the added technology you may need for a digital presence with clients. Like I added a microphone because my computer mic, one day I went to like 2 or 3 different platforms and the computer mic must have said, this is too crazy. I couldn't even nobody could hear me anymore. So I was like, okay, what's going on? And, but you take for granted now how many different platforms you may be on in one day, just engaging people virtually. And so for me, I could be on 3 different platforms in one day, just working with either other colleagues or clients, and the system just wasn't prepared. And then even though I have Wi-Fi, I ended up getting an Ethernet cord. Just so I can make sure, the ability to stream and everything was a little bit stronger. So I'm not competing with everybody else in my home who's using the Wi-Fi just to make sure the content's okay. So I do think adding those things, like you have to start making those adjustments, and making different kinds of investments as we continue in this. So then what I want to shift to is a point, and I read this, I think Catherine Price, she is the founder of Screen Life Balance. And I know I read an article that talked about we need to start thinking about screen life balance and sort of what is that, how's that, what's the implications of that now that we're living in this virtual world more? So, Tangier, I'm going to start with you because she made some interesting points, like, and some of the things that you already said. She said there are just as there are different types of food, there are different types of screen time. And I thought that was a good point. She talked about there aren't any absolute rights or wrongs for the use of screens. She said you need to determine which uses of your screens are essential and in what amount. And then she said you need to evaluate how many hours are necessary to get the job done. And I thought those were things that were like people have to start thinking about. And she talked about the difference between being busy versus productive on the screens. So I'm thinking, what should psychologists be thinking about, as we're talking about screen life balance? And what are your thoughts on this issue? And Kenji, I'll start with you, then I'll go to Jared.
I got you. So I think when it comes to screen life balance, when I was reading the article, I just found it very interesting and kind of similar to what you were talking about with, over leveraging your screen time. Like a lot of us nowadays, we're like on social media. You can get lost on social media for hours on end compared to just like reading an ebook. So I feel like really dividing up your screen time is one thing that would be very beneficial to you. I feel like, sorry about that. I feel like dividing up your screen time would be very beneficial to you, and really just deciding what you want to look at first. Do you want to use like a certain amount of time just for your luxury, or do you want to use a certain amount of time for reading a book, for accomplishing some work that you might have to do? So I feel like for psychologists, it's very important to divide the screen time up to overall make it very useful for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jared, any other thoughts?
Yeah, just going off of what Tangier said, I think that mindfulness is a really important aspect to this practice of balance. And setting alarms for yourself on your phone is important because, as Tangier said, you can easily get lost in social media. For example, if you're talking about establishing a social media presence or digital presence, you may never have used Instagram or Twitter before. So you find yourself swiping through just to familiarize yourself. Competency, that's important. But then when does that become unhealthy? And
Gotcha.
when does 1 hour become 5 hours becomes your general behavior. So I think what Tangier was saying is that, scheduling the time, maybe setting some reminders, and especially if your ability to be mindfully aware of these processes and stop yourself in the moment. If that's a trouble, then maybe setting multiple alarms will be helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. I like that. And I like the fact that y'all giving people strategies to get through the day, because I think a lot of people are talking about that now. And I know I heard in a conversation that people are even saying, like, position yourself sort of at a distance, from the screens too, so you don't get that fatigue of being so close and being overwhelmed with like the facial features and interactions, because we don't sit this close normally in therapy. So we have to be conscious of replicating some of the similar distances, but then also try to balance that with trying to reading the nonverbals. So it's almost like it's a new way of being, and I think it's going to take some time for us to start figuring out exactly how to become these sort of virtual talking heads and catch all of the nuances. So it's a process for sure. I don't even have any solutions, except we just have to grow like we do every other skill. It is something that we grow in as we get more experience. So I appreciate
That's exactly what mindfulness is, Dr. Lee. I think it's a great way to describe it, is that mindfulness is a muscle, like a tool.
Mm-hmm.
The more that you practice mindfulness, the stronger it gets, and the more that we can use it. You don't just wake up one day and become a guru.
Yes.
You got to practice being still. So I think that's a great way to say it.
I like it. And so what I wanted to close on is if there are any resources that you would recommend for clinicians or even clients out there. I know you mentioned an article a little earlier. So I'm wondering if there are any resources that you would recommend for people in terms of helping them make this adjustment around, sort of maintaining and managing a digital presence. And Jared, I'll start with you, then go to Tangier.
Absolutely. So there are a lot of great resources. If you haven't visited APA in a long time, then this might be a good time to do that, because they put a lot of great communication resources. Also, if assessment is more your line of things, the INS and NAN, both neuropsychology organizations, have a lot of resources, as does AACN and Sports Neuropsych Society. In addition, NJPA has a lot of great resources on there that we're building on there. If you're a graduate student, NJPAG has a lot of free resources. Just in terms of if you're trying to get into teleassessment, there are a lot of great books on psychology and the law and ethics. And I think that there are some great resources about teleassessment and psychology that maybe some psychologists are not familiar with. I would recommend purchasing that. Actually, if you join Kindle, you get, I think, Kindle Unlimited for 90 days free, where a lot of these resources are free as well. So that there's a lot of great companies right now who are doing free trials. So SPSS is free. So if you have any research you need to do now, this is the time to do it. So I would say my recommendation is just get out there, see what's available, and take advantage of what's going on right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Tangier, any thoughts around resources?
I think for when it comes to resources, kind of like what Jared said, the APA and NJPA, looking at, psychological help during this time period is really helpful to you in your business. I feel like when it comes to resources like those, and especially in the time that we're living in at the moment, it's very important to know about, digital strategies and digital presence that will help enhance your business. I also really would recommend this Catherine Price article as well, just for the fact that I felt like it was really marketable for psychologists. I felt like it talked about all the things that you don't really think about when you're, engaging in business and marketing as far as psychology goes. And I feel like it would really be helpful towards a lot of people during this time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the shouts out for the shout outs for NJPA. Because normally I have to mention that myself. So I'm like, good, I ain't got to do that today.
Holding it down for you.
So So I want to thank you guys. This has been really great and helpful. And I'm glad that we even had the glitches to show people that even if you work through the glitches, you still can accomplish things, and that you don't let the problem of technology stop you from using it. It's like everything else. Sometimes you go out to your car and your car doesn't start, and you got to figure out what you need to do to get your car started. I said the difference is with technology, it's the same thing. You may have to keep playing with the technology in order until you get it to function the way you need. So I want to encourage everybody for everything. I want to wish everybody a great holiday weekend. And I want to thank our guests today, Jared Hammond and Tangier Moore, for communicating. And I'll be honest, what you shared and what you communicated was helpful, because sometimes we need to hear from the younger folks who like live and breathe in this stuff. It's like, so I don't live and breathe in it, but I'm learning to start to live and breathe in it. So I think the folks who do it most
I think
of the time
you made a good point, Dr. Lee, because especially working in the schools with the younger kids, this is a real thing. I've seen parents give cell phones to their 2-year-olds. So this will literally be the first generation to grow up with technology. So it's important for us to really understand how to use it so that we can understand and help the next generation.
I agree. Good point. All right. Well, thank you guys. And I think we're going to do our end credits and be done with this. So I appreciate it. And I'm hoping I can get you guys on some future episodes too. So I'm definitely looking for folks to be hosts and stuff like that. So feel free.
Put us forward.
So I was going to say, Christian, whenever you're ready, you can take us out.
Disclaimer. This podcast is intended to provide members of the general public with access to information regarding the potential benefits of psychological treatment. This podcast is not intended as a referral service, an advertisement of services, or a solicitation of business, and is not intended to create a psychologist-patient relationship between any of the podcast participants and the listener. Any individual status as a participant on this podcast does not suggest recommendation of any such individual as a provider of services by NJPA or its affiliates. Thank you for listening to the NJPA Power of the Spoken Word podcast series. Remember that psychologists can provide meaningful insights to improve our understanding of things that matter in life. As experts in human emotions, behavior, and functioning, psychologists work with you to bring you the positive changes you want in your life. Be sure to visit the NJPA website at www.psychologynj.org and follow NJPA on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings, but I'ma be alright.